Good morning, welcome everyone. My name is Alexandra Filius. I'm CHERN's network coordinator and a program manager for PhD students based at the Faculty of Social Sciences at Vrije Universiteit in Amsterdam. And I will be moderating today's event. CHERN, the China and Europe Research Network, is a platform for knowledge exchange about China's increasing presence in Europe among academic and non-academic communities. It was supported by COST, the European Cooperation in Science and Technology, as a cost action from 2019. CHERN is chaired by Professor Nana de Graaf, together with Professor Jeffrey Henderson, and as its vice chair. It currently has 5 working groups working on different topics with their respective coordinators and more than 300 working group members. To learn more, please visit our website and subscribe to our newsletter to keep up to date with our activities. Within our various activities, amongst other aims, we strain to facilitate exchange amongst researchers, journalists, and policymakers. Recognizing the specific needs of these groups, the idea for the CHERN online briefings was born. This initiative, spearheaded by CHERN's core group members Agota Reves and Jelena Kledic and myself, seek to identify significant events in the context of China's European presence and provide primarily journalists and policymakers with relevant insights from researchers from our network. Next slide, please. These briefings, we keep them short and practical and leave it open to you whether you want to pursue a certain topic for a one-on-one basis. Thus, we will have a brief introduction to the topic, followed by short inputs from our 3 speakers, around 5 minutes each. And then we have a room for 10 to 20 minutes for general Q&A. Remember, the idea is not to exhaust the topic today in this format, but rather to provide insights and make connections that can be further developed. The meeting is in a format of a webinar and it's being recorded. And after the short presentations, we will invite everyone who wishes to join us as a participant in the Q&A as a panelist. That part of the event will not be recorded. Next slide, please. Now on the topic, this is the 3rd CHERN online briefing, but the 2nd on the topic of risks and opportunities in academic and research collaboration. So we're building on the previous event where Agota Reves as moderator and 3 insightful speakers spoke about the complex topic of academic and research collaboration in a changing geopolitical landscape, and how the process of de-risking collaboration with China plays out in the domain of science and academia. You can see the recording of the previous event on our YouTube channel, and considering the vast interest in the topic and the importance of the topics, there will be a 3rd event this next week. Today, I would like to start with sharing some personal experiences with the challenges that we are discussing here. Next slide, please. When I started as a program manager at the Graduate School Faculty of Social Sciences at VU, we had several PhD candidates from China. Most of them were funded by the China Scholarship Council, or the CSC. And there was a lot of attention for the MOU that we have with the CSC at university level. The CSC program was widely advertised within the university, and there was even budget for a group of researchers or employees actually to travel to Beijing to the so-called CSC PhD workshop fair to recruit scholarship applicants. Next slide, please. Now I see, although that the MOU is still there, that there are some colleagues that find it too risky to hire PhD candidates from China, because my university, like most other universities in the Netherlands, has recently developed and implemented a protocol for knowledge security. These policies were developed under increasing political pressure since late 2018. Although the protocol looks solid on paper, it's still too vague. People who are involved in the assessment of the risks, they are still struggling on what basis they should make their decisions. And this may lead to a better play it safe than sorry and avoid the trouble of not having PhD candidates from China and funded by the CSC. So what does that mean for the people? PhD students from mainland China who want to study here will likely find it more difficult to find a supervisor requirement they need for the admission to graduate school, and therefore also for the application to the scholarship. And at the same time, graduated PhDs who are looking for a job here will find it more difficult to find one because of implicit suspicion by potential employers, or the overall environment might be less attractive because of stigmatization and discrimination by the people the potential people they will work with, or directly or indirectly by people they work with who are afraid for what colleagues may think or for public opinions. So you have knowledge security, but you lose human capital since they look for opportunities elsewhere. Next slide, please. And our speakers of today will provide more insights on this topic. We will start with Dr. Yuzhuo, Senior Lecturer and Adjunct Professor in the Higher Education Group at the Faculty of Management and Business, Tampere University, and Co-Director of Global Research Institute for Finnish Education at the Education University of Hong Kong. His research primarily focuses on the higher education and innovation studies, including international higher education cooperation between the EU and China. Dr. Yuzhuo, the floor is yours.
Hey, thank you very much for inviting me to join such interesting dialogues. It's truly my pleasure. So given the limited time, I'd better go straight forward to my topic. So Alexandra just illustrated the challenges she's facing in her university. So I try to, bring this kind of a challenge to a little bit larger picture on EU-China higher education cooperation, focusing on the paradoxes. Next slide, please. Okay. So I only have 4 slides. So talking about paradoxes in 4 dimensions. So this is the paradoxes, the perceptions on EU-China cooperation. So EU basically in general, of course, I have to admit that all the simplification and generalization are very limited. So the reality is very complicated. So I try to simplify the things to catch the majority phenomenon at the big picture. So there are always some variations. So in general, the EU's partners perceive China like this is a very centrally controlled system. So if there are some political discussions showing tensions between the two sides, so this kind of challenges will naturally pass on the university level collaboration. But actually in reality is even Chinese government try to separate the political discourse and university collaboration, in reality, encouraging universities to be more engaged with European partners. Also regarding the China perceive European universities are very autonomous, independent in making their decisions, regardless of the political discussion. They can still maintain collaboration, but the reality is also different, as you know. So basically, there's a higher level alignments between university strategies and the European Union's concerns. Next slide. Yeah. As we all know, the challenges for higher education is there's increasing alignment between education and the political and the economic agenda. So in terms of the integration, education and the political economic agendas, so there are also some paradoxes. So on the EU side, EU is aware of the challenges of balancing political and economic interest in higher education cooperation at EU level, and also the state members the governments, trying to investigate the challenges and develop knowledge, eventually provide some guidelines. However, the guidelines are very abstract on principle level. And then they give the power, decision power to university. You decide what to do following the guideline. But for universities, basically, they have less capacity than government to fully grasp the broader economic and political agenda, found it's very challenging to interpret the principles set by the government. On the China side, as China is a relatively centrally planned system, it's more likely political, economic, and higher education agendas could be better coordinated. But in reality, they are also operating on separate track. So one example showing the paradox is, even though universities are encouraged to collaborate with Europe, and when the scholars applying visa, so they face some challenges in terms of internal control. So the policy in different sectors are not very much coordinated. So there are some paradox. Next slide. So the next slide is about the EU's strategies, paradoxes in EU's strategies on China cooperation. So I try to be brief because we are more or less in the context. We all know that basically there are paradoxes in the decoupling and the de-risking. So basically it's very challenging. We want to maintain collaboration to have the opportunities, but on the other hand, we consider high risk. Also, many European partners, institutions are aware of the value system difference between China and Europe. On the other hand, in cooperation, they highlight that the importance, to have the alignment also in the value system. We have the common goals and the norms. Also, cooperation and competition. So these are quite obvious, challenges, paradox. And finally, regarding the risk management, so European institutions tend to develop the mechanisms on the screening of risk mitigation. On the other hand, there is lack of effective knowledge in risk assessment, how to make a judgment, which is risk or not. So final slide, please. So also there are some paradoxes in China's strategies on cooperation with the European higher educations. As we know, the global landscape is changing very rapidly. On the other hand, China's strategies coping with the situation is not very explicit. So it's very difficult to see what are the Chinese policies on that, at least in terms of the written documents. China want to be open, rhetorically, at least to embrace the global science, especially on European collaboration. But on the other hand, China also has increasing political demands for knowledge security. This is quite similar to the scenario on the European side. Also, China also still want to collaborate with Europe, for science technology development. On the other hand, China also had a policy for pursuing the so-called self-reliance. And then following that is basically about the global engagement and also the national policy agenda. So the policies are not always aligned with each other. Finally, about the recognition of the European universities, also research institutions' importance in international collaboration. China wants to collaborate with more European institutions, given the challenges with the collaboration with the US. However, the Chinese experience on collaboration with the West, so-called West, is primarily based on working with American institutions, because the majority scientists, academics are collaborating with American institutions. So that's all what I want to share at this moment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Yuzhuo, for your valuable input regarding these perceptions and also the strategies in higher cooperation between EU and China from both perspectives. During the Q&A, there will be room to discuss this any further. I would now like to move to our second speaker, Dr. Cristina Pinna. Next slide, please. Dr. Cristina Pinna is a fellow at the University of Groningen, Faculty of Arts. She served as a senior policy advisor for the UN Development Program in China. And she has also collaborated with UNESCO at the Chinese University of Hong Kong. And she was a fellow at Peking University. Her current research focuses on China's soft power and international relations, especially in the context of EU-China strategic partnership Cristina, the 5 minutes floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Alexandra. So I will continue in the discussion, zooming in into the how actually EU member states are navigating knowledge security, looking at 3 member states that are very different within their position within the EU and also in the cooperation with China. Next slide. So first of all, one sentence on introduction, that what we are experiencing is like, or what we are saying, we call it or try to define as a securitization process of what is knowledge and research. And then what exactly knowledge and research security means is actually an open question. It stays as an open question. But what is important in this context is that they all involve academic cooperation. So higher education institutions are actually at the center of this process. But cooperation within the EU operates at the level of member states. So even though there is a certain alignment at the EU level, we see that member states operate in very different ways based on national interest, strategic priorities, and academic strengths. This creates a quite diverse and multi-phase landscape of educational cooperation with China that is not always aligned with each other and not always aligned with the EC. So as we can see, the 3 countries start actually from very different positions. We can look at many indicators on that, but it's interesting to look, for instance, also at academic indicators. Next, please. I will start talking about the 3 different countries, starting from the ones who are more aligned with the EU. And certainly there is the Netherlands. So following what Alexandra just said, the Netherlands is one of the countries who is more aligned with the position of the EU, and where the geopolitical dimension in higher education actually entered in at a quite early stage, even before 2019, I would say. But there is a documented sheet in 2019 with a reposition to a more cautious attitude towards China. Then we have in 21, actually the Dutch Security Service issued a report on knowledge security mentioning directly China, the cooperation with China. And in 2022, we have the National Knowledge Security Guidelines. This actually has increased then in terms of scrutiny, and we see the emerging of certain screening mechanisms within the institutions, both so at the political level, the policy level, but also implementation at the governance level. And we have several examples. For instance, probably the TU Delft is one of the main with the internet screening tool, but also others. And there is a new knowledge security screening law to be implemented next year. So it's really a work in process, quite developed. Next slide, please. Italy has a more ambivalent position. Last year at the Intergovernmental Committee, there was highlighted the importance of scientific and technological cooperation. However, the cooperation is shifting in its approach. There is not the same open, and cooperation needs to be justified. Screening mechanisms are not yet in place, but certainly there is an increase in awareness documented in both academic but also other sectors. What we can say is that the risk from China is seen more as a top-down approach, as rightly underlined by Casarini, and we can see resistance from key sectors, including the academic sector, but also local authority that continue to deepen ties with Beijing, beside this changing of position. Next slide, please. Last is Hungary, that sees China as an opportunity rather than a risk. Certainly, Hungary has a very peculiar position within the EU. And what is important in this context is that the reach of the rule of law within the EU also causes as an impact on academic higher education institutions with the suspension of fundings. But the country cooperation with China has a strong political alignment. And this it's followed actually by also substantial academic and technological exchanges. In terms of knowledge security, the narrative at the government level emphasizes more the importance of joint thinking and international cooperation rather than inclusivity and knowledge sharing. Next, please. So in conclusion, knowledge security seems like as a work in progress. There are different country approaches, governance mechanisms and responsibilities at individual and institutional level are increasing, but are still to be defined. And while there is, yes, an alignment in terms of the increase in securitization of knowledge and research, there is an increase in also misunderstanding and misperceptions. I conclude also with a few questions. What is exactly the meaning then of knowledge and research security? Maybe this is actually what we should reflect on, and how we define the border, the exact border of what it should be open and what should be closed. And knowledge security is usually actually one of the objectives is to protect our values, including academic freedom. But what is the impact of knowledge security and research security on academics and academic freedom if we reverse this question? Thank you.
Thank you, Cristina, for this very interesting insights regarding the various stances towards China. During the Q&A, there will be room to discuss this any further. Please note that the special issue Rethinking EU-China in Higher Education Cooperation in a dynamic and global environment for the Journal of Studies in International Education is forthcoming this January. The special issue is edited by our first two speakers, Yuzhuo and Cristina Pinna, and also Marijke van der Wende, Distinguished Faculty Professor of Higher Education at Utrecht University. Next slide, please. I would now like to move on to our last speaker, Dr. Yunpeng Zhang. Yunpeng Zhang is an assistant professor in urban and regional planning at University College Dublin. He's interested in politics of knowledge production, and he has extensive experience working with China-based colleagues and is currently teaching in a dual program jointly offered by the University College Dublin and Chang'an University.
Thank you very much, Alexandra. So to continue the kind of discussion we are having here, thinking about the kind of opportunities and the risks involved in collaborating with China, I think to fully understand the risks and opportunities in working with China, it is very essential that we first improve our understanding of China itself. As a geographer, I'm particularly interested in how geography shapes social and economic processes, including the ways knowledge is created. This then leads me to the key question: how does place influence the knowledge we produce about China? When I speak about knowledge production and its politics, I mean knowledge is not something out there, to be discovered or to be passively received. It is actively produced by individuals or groups in specific places and influenced by different forces. University researchers and students are key players in the process, and I believe that students in particular should not be seen as consumers of education and knowledge, but instead they are the valuable knowledge workers contributing to knowledge creation. Thank you for changing the slide. And the higher education landscape that shapes knowledge about China is becoming increasingly global. This shift is particularly evident in two main ways. First, Yuzhuo has already talked about, since the 90s, there has been a significant increase in the number of Chinese students studying as well as conducting research abroad, while the COVID-19 pandemic and also the tightening restrictions Cristina just mentioned have certainly affected this mobility. China remains one of the top sources of international students, For universities in countries like the UK or Australia, Chinese students make a substantial contribution to university finances. Second, there has also been a remarkable growth in joint degree programs and collaborative institutions established by so-called Western universities or research institutions with Chinese university partners. In 2020, the Chinese Ministry of Education reported over 2,300 such programs. And the Irish universities, for instance, have some 10,000 students enrolled in these kind of partnerships schemes in China, and I'm also involved in teaching here. The transnational nature of higher education raises a very important question. How does this kind of cross-border mobility influence the knowledge produced about China? So the assumption here is that educational and research cultures are different, and that by crossing the borders can somehow bring fresh perspectives. This idea is also, in fact, one of the main reasons that Chinese institutions and authorities support international collaboration. Yet within the field of Chinese regional studies, a curious pattern is emerging. Could you please change to the next slide, please? As more research and knowledge are produced, our understanding of China appears to be narrowing. This is based on our preliminary study on so-called Chinese regional studies, focusing on how China's cities and Chinese regions changes. And we believe there are a few contributing factors to this particular phenomenon. The first is different research cultures and research priorities. Research within China is more often driven by policies, while in Europe, by contrast, it tends to focus on more fundamental research questions. The second is the hierarchies of knowledge and language. English remains the dominant language in academic publications, though Chinese authorities are increasingly encouraging researchers to publish in Chinese. When publishing English, researchers often have to fit in within the established frameworks expressed through English in order to gain relevance and to avoid entrapping themselves into China exceptionalism, which basically sees China as some kind of exception to established theories or understanding. The third reason is an increasing deficit in regional knowledge and expertise related to China. At times, the bar for studying China in Europe is set rather low. For instance, knowledge of Mandarin is often not always required. This gap may widen further due to the rising geopolitical tensions, the heightening screening of the Chinese researchers, funding cuts, and also this growing distrust towards Chinese scholars and the collaborations with Chinese scholars. And finally, labor market pressures also play a role. For Chinese researchers working abroad, heightened tensions are prompting many to consider returning to China, where they face unique pressures from Chinese employers and also the existing research networks. These pressures can influence researchers' choice of topics, the methods, the approaches. This, of course, can also affect the creation of new knowledges about China. So the big question is, how can we move forward? And I think this is a question for both academics and also for the political circles. And I'll stop here.
Sorry, I also needed to unmute. Thank you, Yunpeng, for your interesting presentation about the politics of knowledge production. And thank you all for the very informative pitches. In case any of our viewers would like to get in touch with our speakers, the link to their professional web pages are on the website. On the event page, you can scan the QR code, it will bring you there. I would also like to remind you, we will have a third online briefing on this topic next week, and we all invite you to sign up. Same as today, the video of the pitches will be posted on our YouTube channel, but the Q&A is not being recorded. Next slide, please. On this note, we proceed with the Q&A, and here we say goodbye to all those who will be watching this recording at a later point in time. Another thank you to the speakers and also the organizers of today's CHERN online briefing. We say goodbye here to the future audience.